Did you know that every state in the US has a geological survey? So, what exactly is it that these state geological surveys do? And why are they important? Hello, my name is Rachel, and I am currently one of GSA's Science Communication Fellows, which means that I'll be popping on here on the GeoSociety channel a little bit more this year to share a lot of the work being published in their journals, the work being presented at their annual meeting, and that's what you're watching right now. I also have my own channel called GeoGirl, where I share a lot of geoscience content as well, so I will link that in the description box of this video if you're interested in checking it out. And with that, we'll get back to today's conversation. Today, I got to sit down with Dr. Jon Kim and Dr. Ben Dejong from the Vermont Geological Survey to discuss their upcoming theme session at the Northeastern Northcentral Geological Society of America sectional meeting this March 2025, which is all about what state geological surveys do and why their work is so important. So whether you're interested in attending this session or not, the conversation we had was so insightful, especially if you might be a student looking into what you might do in the future and whether maybe working at a state geological survey or collaborating with them or maybe doing internships with them would be right for you. So let's get into the conversation.
My name is Jon Kim. I work for the Vermont Geological Survey in Montpelier, Vermont, and I do investigations involving bedrock geology.
And I am Ben Dejong, also with the Vermont Geological Survey, and I am the state geologist there and the director of the survey.
Wow, awesome. And we'll get much more into detail on that. So first, just kind of an introduction to why we're here. We're here to talk about the theme session you guys are co-chairing at the upcoming Northeastern Northcentral GSA sectional meeting in late March this year, 2025. And this theme session you are chairing is called Applied Geological Investigations at State Geological Surveys in the Northeastern and Northcentral sections of GSA. So to first just start off our conversation, why did you guys submit this theme session? What are you hoping attendees get out of it?
So just to start, so I'm a geologist and Ben's the state geologist, but he and I thought that it was important to emphasize the complex applied geological investigations being done at state geological surveys. And since this is a combined meeting of the Northeastern and North Central sections, we thought we would have a lot of participation by other state surveys.
Yeah, and this also follows a model that was set by the Maine Geological Survey in the 2024 Northeast sectional meeting. They also did an applied session, and we were pretty heavily engaged on that one. There was a wonderful turnout of folks at that meeting, and it's just a great venue to showcase the ways that we do our work and the applied work that we do alongside academic collaborators. It just kind of brings us all into the same space. And it's also a great opportunity for students who are at the meeting to come and see what state surveys are all about.
Awesome. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of good payoff for students that attend that session. So we've mentioned a few times, this term state surveys and applied work that's being done. So what exactly do state surveys do and why is it so important?
I'm going to go backwards a little bit first before I start there, and first just point out that state surveys tended to be projects in the 1800s, and then state surveys turned into institutions in the 1900s that remain really unique in our function. Our academic colleagues tend to be really focused on concepts, right? Research. And private industry tends to be focused on their clients and on profits, while state surveys are generally focused on mapping, stewardship, and protection of resources in coordination with our academic and industry partners. But no two surveys are the same. And I think that theme is going to come up many times this morning. It's kind of a continuum. Some surveys are linked to public universities, so they're really more embedded in research. Some surveys have regulatory functions. And then there's a continuum in between. The type of data that we map and that we are stewarding, the resources we are stewarding and protecting varies from state to state. So it really directly relates to the issues we are facing in our specific states, which is why the work is so applied, right? We're going to do the work that really matters to our states. So for example, in Vermont, we are very heavily engaged right now in landslide hazards after two really intense storms the last 2 summers. something like that comes up, we need to put our efforts there for Vermonters. Or Jon will speak a lot about protecting our bedrock aquifers. In other states, it's going to be totally different. They might have the right geology or stratigraphy to do carbon sequestration, so they're going to have their effort there. Or they might have critical mineral belts, and so they'll be focused on mapping there. So we go where society needs us to go. But put very simply, I'd say our role is to provide non-biased, spatial, geologic information for the public good, and then to make that information available to our academic colleagues, to public sector scientists. And it's worth noting that sometimes the data we are collecting ends up being used for unanticipated applications. So we maintain that in databases and make it available.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful kind of introduction to this discussion, because it really emphasizes the fact that all this work is going towards society. It is non-biased, just trying to help where society needs, especially the applied work that surveys do. So, in terms of the session, how many state surveys have submitted abstracts to the session? And what's the range of subject matter that's going to be covered during the session?
Okay, so we have state surveys 4, and I want to shout out to, obviously there's Vermont, but Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Illinois. We also received 2 abstracts from the US Geological Survey. Ben and I jokingly call this session is very geo-eclectic. I'll give you just a summary of the type of subject matter. For example, we have 4 abstracts on groundwater quantity and quality. We have 3 on landslide mitigation. We have 1 on petroleum geology. We have 1 on critical minerals, which are the minerals used to make some of the most common electronic appliances and electric cars. We have 2 on carbon capture and sequestration, 1 on an emerging geophysical technique called passive seismic. And then we have coastal change in lakes and erosion. So it's really across the spectrum, and gives you as we mentioned in the title, I mean, it's groundwater quality and quantity, it's economic minerals, it's geologic hazards. We're trying to emphasize everything we could, at least for the Northcentral and Northeastern state surveys.
I just want to emphasize what you just said there, because I think the way you just highlighted all that subject matter that's going to be covered is so important for people to understand, not just people potentially attending the session, but also anybody, any general public, because a lot of people, I mean, my own research is trying to figure out, there's a lot of misperceptions regarding what geology or geological surveys in science means. And a lot of people just think it's, resource science or oil and gas or rocks or whatever. But there's all this environmental work. There's all this critical minerals and landslides and other natural hazards and water contamination and all of these studies and applied investigations going on as well at geological surveys. So I think it's just really cool that you can go down that list and you see that. You really see how much it really does cover, which I think is super important.
I guess a stereotype is that we do mapping. And mapping is often thought of to be that it's geologists putting on their hiking boots and going out with their compasses and their GPS units and their maps and just mapping things in a given area. And certainly at the Vermont Geological Survey, and like all of our other surveys we know, mapping includes mapping bedrock geology, superficial geology, chemistry, geophysics, well logging, hydrogeology, and all of these things are mapping. And the stereotype is a little bit less broad than the actuality of what we do. And we have to do this. It has to be multidisciplinary.
I think this also, the depth and breadth of all the topics here just makes for a really cool session too, because if you think of most sessions at GSA, you're going to take one topic and it's going to be cool and it's going to be interesting, but we're going to beat it to death. Whereas this one, we're going to be all over the place and it's all really applied.
Absolutely. And I, again, want to emphasize you both have placed an emphasis on this word applied geological investigations in both the discussion right now as well as the theme session title, because what you guys do at state surveys is the application of research, not just research, which is typically the focus of other like academic, institutions. So the application of the research is done at these surveys, and that's, typically aimed at these very societally relevant issues like natural hazards and groundwater contamination and economic resources. So with that in mind, who is funding state survey investigations? And does it vary depending on state?
Yeah, totally. I would stick with that theme that every state is different. Most state geological surveys function as branches of state government agencies, but there are some that are housed within public universities, so they're more research oriented, perhaps, at some of those. Regarding the funding, currently it changes right through time, but currently on average, I think it's just under 1/4 of state geological survey funding comes from federal programs. That's a little bit higher than historical averages. It's not the highest, which I think was in 2012 or 13 with there was some stimulus funds at that time, but it's a bit higher than average. And that funding, that federal funding typically comes from competitive grants because it's very different state to state. There's a huge range. Like some states have 0% federal funding. They are self-sufficient. They fund themselves through things like fees associated with managing and regulating the oil and gas industry, if they have that in their state. And then some are almost 100% federally funded. There might be, a couple staff that are on a federal grant, and that's pretty much it. They don't have any state appropriations. I'd say most surveys have some level of recurring state appropriations or general funds that support the states. There are also some non-recurring state appropriations sometimes. If something comes up and you really need some support on a specific issue, there might be like one-time asks for funding to do a certain project.
So who do state surveys do state surveys collaborate with other entities in their investigations, and do state surveys have an opportunity to engage with each other?
So I'm going to start out here. So Ben had talked about funding sources. And in terms of the projects, we have, and I'll put in quotation marks, clients who ask for our services and provide funding. And so, for example, I'll just give you for the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, the Waste Management and Prevention Division. They are very interested in our work on PFAS problems. Drinking Water Division asks for our help with physical and chemical aquifer characterization related to new wells or wells that they want to have deepened. We work with the Agency of Agriculture on nitrate contamination around large farms. We also work with Buildings and General Services on PFAS issues at one of their fire training academies. The Vermont Emergency Management is interested in us and funds us for landslide mitigation projects. And lastly, I'll just put in the Vermont Department of Health will often work with us. We've worked with them on radon in air and how it relates to bedrock geology. And then this kind of rolls into from our clients who are interested in our work and then also provide support and funding. But there are scientists there in those divisions that actually help work with us as well. But in terms of the different types of investigation, I just really want to point out that all these applied investigations are really complex. I think this is something really for students to know. We need lots of multidisciplinary expertise. We don't always have it. And so what we do is we partner with academic institutions and directly for us, our partners pretty much every year are Middlebury College, State University of New York at Plattsburgh, Norwich University, and the University of Vermont. Because the thing is, we need really high levels of expertise. And what we do is we work together with all them on these projects to get studies together that will really meet the needs of our, quote, clients and society. And for the student point of view, for over 20 years, we've had student interns involved. And we ask them not only to have a nice experience, we ask them to produce professional quality work that can be published. And so there's nothing like smart and motivated students in helping our investigations. And lastly, I just wanted to point out, because Ben is going to elaborate on this more, we do collaborate with the US Geological Survey on some projects. And in the context of working with our clients, we'll often interact with environmental consultants. And lastly, I'll say is that we do have projects because geology does not end at state borders. It never has, or international borders. We've worked with other state surveys in the Northeast, such as New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and we'll continue to do so on specific projects.
I would put a huge, bold red exclamation point on what Jon said about the need for expertise. For Vermont, for example, we're having these extreme flooding and landslide hazards. We really need hydrologists, geomorphologists, geotechnical experts with help on some of those. If we have a significant PFAS issue in our fractured bedrock aquifers, we need geochemists, we need hydrogeologists, we need structural geologists. We're dealing with this energy transition, and we need to identify where our lithium and rare earth element minerals are for these alternative energy sources. We need mineralogists, economic geologists. In our session, there's carbon sequestration themes that really require a keen sense of stratigraphy and geoengineering. It's all the things, right? We need all the things that you would take in a traditional geology course. And I mention that now because higher ed it's tough. And enrollment is down for a lot of reasons, including just the sheer numbers of people available to apply to go to college. So now more than ever, we need to remind folks that we need this expertise to deal with these issues. So thank you, Jon, and I'll get off my soapbox there. But so yes, state surveys do interact with one another. Like Jon said, geology doesn't care about state lines. So we do have individual projects here and there where we cross state lines with one another, but far and away, the most inter-survey engagement comes from the Association of American State Geologists, which is just exactly that. It's just an association that brings us all together, gives us a collective voice. This was formed up a long time ago in 1908 at the encouragement actually of the USGS. And it allows us to work together, it allows us to learn from one another, but it also respects that we all are responsible to the state entities that we report to, which is great. That AASG also allows us to advocate collectively for the federal grant programs that we rely on. So we're very specifically not lobbyists, but we do take the time to talk to legislators and explain to them how important the work that we do is. And then, like Jon said, there is opportunities for more collective research. There's, for example, in this session, this will represent two pretty prominent groups of states that work together, the Great Lakes Geologic Mapping Coalition and the New England State Geologic Mapping Coalition, that have received bits of funding from the USGS to explore themes that do cross state lines. And I think some of that will be highlighted at the meeting in March.
I think that's so cool. I didn't know there was an Association of American State Geologists, but that's really awesome because you're right. Geology doesn't just stop at state lines. So you have to collaborate. I'm glad that exists so that you guys can collaborate.
Yeah, and it just helps too with that relationship to the USGS, because rather than having 50 different relationships and 50 different messages, we can just have one collective voice that works with the USGS.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot more sense. I'm glad that exists. The other thing I love that you highlight is just the range of expertise needed. I think there's so many students out there that don't know that, certain structural geology or geophysics or geochemical knowledge is even relevant anymore or ever, or they think, oh, why would anybody ever do this field? What do I even apply it to? We need this expertise for all sorts of geological hazards and environmental issues that you at state surveys and, USGS are trying to address. And I think a lot of people don't fully understand the relevance of all of that expertise. And I think that's one thing your session will do a brilliant job highlighting.
To Jon's point, the environmental problems just are getting more complex, and it requires the multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, if I could just throw in two cents there. So with these environmental problems, no matter what they are, they're incredibly complex, and they seem to be getting more complex. And so to me, what I think that we need smart, motivated graduates with high levels of expertise, but not only high expertise of their own, but their ability to work with other people with high levels of expertise that are not their field. And that collaboration is essential because you can't know anything enough as one person or one group to solve these problems. That's two things that I've definitely learned over the past decade. And that's why we work with as many partners as we can, engage students, and we engage other organizations beyond academia, to understand what's going on.
That's a wonderful point. And speaking of students, the last question I want to ask is, if a student is listening out there that might be interested in the future in getting involved in state survey work, where should they look for more information other than this amazing session?
I guess I'll start. Just reach out to us. We love talking to students. Shoot us an email. When you're bored, just pour a coffee and look through our websites, because our websites tend to have a lot of information about the projects we tend to be involved with. Jon mentioned earlier, he has specifically mentored dozens of students now through internships and otherwise, and working with classes intensively, and is currently has a paper, for example, submitted with Middlebury students who he's been working with on one of our projects at an airport with PFAS issues. So we take every chance we can get to work with students.
And then with the students, we want to be training grounds for their professional careers. And not only do we want them to be able to get good jobs and have things on their resume, we want them to produce quality professional level work for our projects.
Jon famously says our internships are not a checkbox on a resume. They are a lot of work, and students come out feeling really confident in their abilities afterward.
But I think it's a great place to, a lot of people, even like myself, I knew I wanted to go into academia, but getting some experience in the world of applied geological investigations, getting some experience out there doing the work that's actually applying the research that's being done at places like universities is so incredibly important. I had a USGS internship when I was right out of undergrad, and I learned so much more than I could have ever learned in a classroom. So I just think it's really important. And what you say about just reach out, like 2 of the 3 major internships I've had in my life, I just emailed somebody. So students, just reach out. People, these scientists, they want to work with you. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on and telling everybody about this, whether people will be attending the session or not. I think this is such important information for everybody to know. So thank you so much again.
You're welcome. Thank you.